Namaste and welcome everyone. It is such a blessing to be here with my colleague and friend Navjeet. Namaste, Navjeet. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you here.
And everybody's waiting for our part 5.
Yes, and we've been doing this series in depth for a long while now, and it's very exciting. And there's a lot of interest in this exalted transit of Rahu and Ketu and how it's going to affect all of us. In our most recent video, Nav and I had a discussion of if you have Rahu and Ketu in one of these positions of Taurus or Scorpio, it's a very significant time of your life. But how about the other planets? How about the sun, moon, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Saturn? So in this video, we'll try to give into some detail if, let's say, Rahu is transiting your Mars, or Ketu is transiting your Jupiter, or Rahu is transiting your moon, how this will be impacting you during this transit, both in a positive way and what are some of the challenges that you could face during this period, because we like to cover both sides of the spectrum. If it's okay with Nav, we'll start with the short chant
Yes,
to
ready.
to Lord Ganesha.
Yeah, love chants always.
Om Gananam Sva Ganapati Mahavamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamastravastamam Jaistarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatanaha Shrinvanu Tibihi Siddhasadanam Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakayeshu Sarvada Siddhi Buddhi Shakti Sahita Shriman Mahakṣaṇāti Pataye Namo Namaha Nirvignam Kuru Om Namah Shivaya Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Hari Om. So first thing we want to discuss is the sun and the moon as it affects this nodal transit. As it is written in the ancient text, there's a special relationship between Rahu and Ketu and the sun and the moon, as it is said that they eclipse the sun and the moon. And so usually when there's a eclipse of some kind in the universe, it involves Rahu or Ketu coming in conjunction with the sun or the moon. So it's these nodal points which create the eclipses. So it's very significant when this transit may impact your sun or this transit may impact your moon. So first we'll talk a little bit about sun. Now, when Rahu is conjunct with sun, that means that if that transit is happening, that your sun will be in the Taurus sign, so your sun Taurus. And if this transit is happening to you at this time, you're going to be experiencing something similar to a Rahu Sun Conjunction. Now, a Rahu Sun Conjunction has many positive possibilities, and there are many people of great celebrity and great fame and great power with Rahu and Sun Conjunctions that are in a well-dignified position. But the Rahu Sun also can be challenging and have some side effects. So I wanted to cover a little bit about what those are going to be. Now, on the positive side, when you combine, see, the thing about the Rahu and the Sun is the Sun represents the healthy ego, the ego that we should have, which means how we should believe in our soul and how we should believe in ourselves. Rahu is the ego we should not have.
Right.
And so when you combine this karmic energy of the ahankar with the maya of the ego, it can create some confusion as far as the identity, as far as the power, the desire for power. So this conjunction or transit of Rahu on the sun can give a desire for power. It can give a desire for wealth. It could give a desire for fame. It can give a desire for prosperity. And we're not saying that any of those things are negative, but sometimes for people to obtain their goals, they will do negative things to obtain those goals, especially when it comes to power and money and these other things of great temptation in the world of Maya. As we go into this exalted Rahu period, I think a Rahu Sun transit is very significant for that native in terms of what is my healthy relationship with my ego? How do I purge these negative parts of my ego out and believe in myself in a humble, proud, and courageous way, but not in a false, pride, egotistical way. So really the true balance of the ego with the Rahu Sun conjunction. But there is a great propensity for material success, but it's all about keeping that ego in check. I will say that about the Rahu Sun, and traditionally, it's not considered a favorable transit. In other words, the desire for power, the hunger for power, the strength of temptation is really high when there is a Rahu Sun conjunction. So people are more at risk to also have to deal with temptation in whichever area of their chart their temptations might be.
Right.
A little bit different is the Ketu sun. When the Ketu will eclipse the sun with the transit, let's say your sun is in Scorpio. The sun does pretty well in Scorpio. I'm a Scorpio sun myself, so I'll be having this transit. When the Ketu and sun are conjunct, it's called the Sannyasi yoga.
Interesting.
And the sun is the soul's direction and Ketu is the moksha karaka. So when you have this combination in this transit, of course, it's significant which house it's affecting. But it is sort of an energy of letting go of our dependency or letting go of our attachment. And we all have certain things in our lives that we have dependencies on or attachments to, or things that give us comfort and pleasure that we don't really need, but we still want or desire them. And those with this aspect of this sun, Ketu on the sun, will be very much transformed to giving up their attachments. And that's the sannyasi yoga energy, letting go of the attachment. Now, if you're a married person, that doesn't mean to become a brahmacharya, but it does mean to let go of your attachment, let go of your control, let go of, what you think you know. That's also a key point, a lot of times we think we know a lot of information, and some of the wisest people I've ever met have told me the less we think we know, in fact, the more we know. So that is something also with the sun transit on the Ketu to keep in mind. Some difficulties with the sun transit on Ketu, as Ketu is the moksha karaka and sun is the father. There's potential even with the Rahu sun, difficulties with the father. Rahu might be more of arguments or problems with the father. Ketu might be health difficulties with the father. And of course, the house position matters. And the father might already be gone. But if there is something between someone and their father during this time, the sun affecting Rahu or Ketu, it should either bring you closer to your father if your father wants to be closer and he is a good man, or you might have to create a strong boundary, especially with the moon. Well, that's with the moon, but creating a strong boundary because potentially the father is a toxic effect in the life. So all of these things must be considered.
Right.
But just in general, the sun transiting Rahu and Ketu, it can be difficult.
Okay.
There's a lot of material potential with Rahu,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of spiritual potential with the Ketu Sannyasi Yoga transit.
Right.
But not everyone is wanting that at the time that they get it. Do you know what I mean? Not everyone wants to be forced to let go of the thing that they are attached to. Not everyone wants to be able to let go of that thing that they are most attached to, and that is shown very strongly. Another really interesting transit during this time is if Rahu or Ketu is transiting your moon. And that would mean that your moon is in either Taurus, which is its exalted position, or Scorpio, which is debilitation position. So already that is a unique position for the moon. And then Rahu will be joining your moon in Taurus, and Ketu will be joining your moon in Scorpio. So fasten your seatbelts. So the first thing we want to say is with the moon with Rahu, it's traditionally considered to be very troublesome, but it's also one of the most intuitive conjunctions that you can see in a natal's chart.
Right.
In other words, Rahu moon that is very mature and well dignified gives person incredible intuition, almost psychic ability. It activates Kundalini energy. And they could be some type of Kundalini master energy, tantric energy, master of tantric energy, if they dedicate their life in a spiritual direction.
Right.
But that's certainly not everybody. And the moon rules the mind, the manas. And Rahu creates a lot of wear and tear on the manas. And so the transit of Rahu in its exalted form on an already exalted moon is going to be very difficult on the manas, on the mental application of the individual. So the person can suffer from confusion. They can suffer from depression. And as Rahu is a Vata planet, they can suffer from anxiety, worry, and nervousness. And there wouldn't necessarily be a reason why they are suffering from that other than the transit itself.
Right.
It's not like it's something they ate or something they drank or something they did. They're facing a mental instability or insecurity as a result of the Moon Rahu transit.
Right.
A little bit of remedy or protection against this transit. You have to be very selective and careful who you surround yourself with, because those with the Rahu moon energy are very intuitive, and they also have empathic potential, which means we pick up on the energies and vibrations of other people.
Right.
And so as this Rahu moon transit hits you, it's very beneficial for you to kind of eliminate any kind of people who make you feel negative emotion.
Right.
And only spend your time with your guru and your friends and your family and the people who make you feel the positive emotion, because you're at that vulnerability to experience confusion and, like a sponge, absorb the negative energy of someone else's negative emotion.
Right.
It does help support emotional maturity by creating boundaries.
Okay. That's with the Rahu moon.
Yeah. But that's if the person is willing to create the boundary.
Okay.
Otherwise, they can be manipulated and taken advantage of. And so, yeah, there's that effect of the Rahu on the mind. And then Rahu also persuades us to think a lot about the future.
Right.
And so the mind will be persuaded toward thinking about the future, usually about our own future.
Right.
But Rahu can be very much Maya or illusion. So that's speculation. So we're thinking about our unknown future.
Right.
Another word for that is daydreaming.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily support us because it takes us out of our service, responsibility, and dharma here on the physical plane.
Right.
it might be fun to have imagination about the future, but we must make sure we first prioritize our dharma, our service, our purpose here on this planet first.
Right.
In other words, people with the Rahu moon transit can get lost with their imagination a little bit.
Right.
Important to keep that in check. And if it's affecting an Arta house, like the second house or the 10th house, it'll be very productive for the financial wealth of the person.
Interesting.
Because the moon will be exalted and Rahu represents that material success. So there will be great material success. Although because of the Rahu moon conjunction, it might have to do with something that success coming at a cost or coming at a price or coming at a sacrifice of the individual's happiness.
Right.
So the moon in Ketu is a little bit different of a transit when the moon is going to be transiting the individual, because the moon in where Ketu is right now, Scorpio, that's where the moon is debilitated. So not only is Ketu exalted, but the moon is debilitated. So the moon loses a lot of its power to the exalted Ketu.
Right.
And the moon is the mind. But the moon is also the family.
Right.
And it's also the homeland. And it's many things. It's unconditional love. It's the heart. It's many things. But when the Ketu eclipses the moon in the Scorpio sign, the person is more likely to go into an alternate form of reality. So the Rahu moon person, they are experiencing some confusion, but there's still some more attachment to the reality of the material world, because they're trying for material goals. But when it comes to the Ketu, the person's mind is automatically dragged towards moksha.
Right.
And for some people, they don't even know what that means. But for a lot of people who have no idea what moksha is, they experience that as fear. And also, one of the reasons that Ketu is exalted in Scorpio is because of its transformative nature.
Right.
Those with moon and Ketu transit, their minds will be incredibly transformed over the next 20 months.
Right.
And whoever that person is now, the way that they perceive things and are emotionally as an individual will rapidly change over this transit.
Okay.
So that can be positive if you're a young person trying to become better.
Right.
That could be negative if you're an old person who has early stage Alzheimer's.
Right.
Because it's only going to push it into its later stages.
Right.
So it's a very powerful transit, and it has both its positive and negative connotations. But it does heavily affect the mind. And for that person who has Alzheimer's even, and gets progressed along their illness, they're also getting closer to God.
Right. Also, I also noticed a little bit with food. My brother has it. My brother has the moon in Scorpio, and he's lost so much weight. He's not been eating much. So food intake,
Yeah.
much relevant, but food intake's like much lesser than before.
Intake of all kinds will be less.
Right.
The person ultimately, energetically, is kind of being pulled out of this material world.
Right.
The Ketu moon combination wants to take us to Svarga.
Yes.
And that's even if you're an atheist.
Right.
So yeah, that can mean you're not eating. That can mean you're having trouble functioning. You're having trouble performing normal tasks.
Correct. Yeah.
Why? Because your spirit is pushing you in a much more spiritual direction that you might not be as familiar with.
Right.
So that's a little bit about the sun and the moon. And first, we'll discuss some benefic transits.
Sure.
The benefic transit, I think, that's very significant to discuss is going to be Jupiter. Everyone's Jupiter is significant in their chart, and Rahu and Ketu have a very unique relationship with Jupiter. It's not really an enemy to either of them, although some say that Rahu and Jupiter are enemies. It's not really been the case in my case studies so much. They can be if it's not mature and it's not evolved, but it can also be very powerful for the individual. So if you have Jupiter in Taurus, Rahu will be transiting your Jupiter. And Jupiter is the planet of wisdom. And Rahu represents our full mystical or occult potential. But Jupiter's wisdom could be much more in the religious direction. So when the Jupiter is transited by the Rahu, it kind of takes the person out of the dogmatic religious side of spirituality and religion, and it puts them more into the mystical or to the occult side of spirituality and religion, where you find Vastu and you find Jyotish and you find Ayurveda and you find all of the mystical, occult, and esoteric sciences, tarot, palmistry.
Nice.
This is very significant transit for the individual in terms of them reaching their spiritual potential. And that's something very positive about this transit. But I've also seen, and this is typically called Guru Chandal Yoga, when Rahu and Jupiter are conjunct, there can be difficulty between the individual and the guru.
Mm.
And I don't mean difficulty in terms of the guru not liking the person or the person not liking the guru. Because I've seen this type of conjunction where the disciple loves their guru. So much so that they can't even contain the Shakti of the presence of their guru.
Mm. Wow.
And it's very, very powerful. But when that energy is so strong, it can make someone feel a little bit crazy.
Hmm.
And so sometimes when the Rahu transits the Jupiter, our relationship to our guru, it can get more mystical on the positive side, or it can get more strange on the negative side.
Hmm.
For example, guru is teacher, and there is a Sat Guru, which has done their spiritual work and reached the full level of enlightenment. But there are also gurus that people run around and worship them as God themselves. And this is commonly seen with the Rahu Jupiter conjunction, mistaking an enlightened person for an incarnation of the entirety of God itself. Not saying that there's not a part of God within that guru, but God is so massive and inconceivable by our little brains.
Right.
That it couldn't possibly take all of its form in one person.
Absolutely.
That person would explode into 10 million pieces.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, even Agni was the only one who could bear Shiva's seed. Not even Parvati could bear Shiva's seed.
Mm.
If you want to get into the Shastras.
Right.
So I find that very fascinating. And so The Jupiter Rahu conjunction, it's very positive in terms of the potential for that person to achieve go in their mystical direction. And it also shows that they can incorporate unique gurus, different gurus, or multiple gurus.
Right.
And that might be healthier than an unhealthy obsession or attachment to one guru. For the individual during this transit, be careful of your the sattvic nature of your relationship with your guru.
Right.
Now, when Ketu is aspecting Jupiter, Ketu and Jupiter are considered friends.
Right.
And that's because they're both these heavenly, spiritual energies.
Right.
And so when someone has a Ketu Jupiter conjunction, if we thought Ketu Moon was going to be pushing them to the heavens, well, then Ketu Jupiter is no exception.
Right.
But Jupiter represents wisdom, and it might be the wisdom that they need to know or to learn so that they may get closer to moksha. That might include knowledge of the Shastras, knowledge of Jyotish, knowledge of reincarnation and the theories of reincarnation and the laws of karma.
Right.
So the Ketu Jupiter combination is educational.
Right.
But ultimately, if it's positioned in the 12th house or in the 8th house, this person is not going to want to be in the material world.
Right.
However, if it's positioned in a powerful place like the 10th bhava, they could be bringing spiritual transformation to society.
Right.
You know, the consciousness, the evolution of our consciousness. I mean, I believe it's happening now. I see that since Rahu and Ketu have gone into their exaltation position, that consciousness is evolving more rapidly.
Right.
At least for most people who are connected to their dharma. We can't say that for everybody. So Jupiter does well with Rahu, but there are more challenges, especially relationship with guru. Relationship with husband can also be difficult, as Jupiter is the karaka for the husband. So if Rahu is affecting that, keep an eye on your husband. And if you're a wife, if you're a husband, keep an eye on your wife. And that doesn't mean that the trust is broken, or that the trust is broken because I'm keeping an extra eye. But there is a vulnerability of someone trying to interfere within the marriage. Someone want to interfering with a marriage.
So that's true if if a female has Taurus, Jupiter.
Yeah, or even Scorpio Jupiter.
Okay, so if she has a Scorpio Jupiter.
Or Taurus.
Okay, so Scorpio Jupiter also has to keep the eye on that, even if Ketu's transiting there, because
yeah,
thing for both.
Yeah, because of the moksha karaka.
Right.
Moksha means bye-bye.
Right.
And the primary cause of the destruction of a marriage is the infidelity.
Right.
I mean, that's usually the primary reason of, how marriages get broken up.
So if a man has Jupiter Taurus, he also has to keep an eye on the partner too?
I have Jupiter Taurus.
Yeah. One of my brother has it too. I just realized it. Yeah, it's in second house. Yeah.
It's just something, yeah, to keep in mind. It means also to keep an eye on yourself
Right.
because temptation is increased.
Yes.
So, you know, it's a mirror.
Right.
It's a mirror. Um, so as far as other benefic planets, we did Sun, Moon, Jupiter. Venus is definitely worth covering here. Um, now, when Rahu transits Venus, Rahu and Venus are friends.
Right.
And if you have Venus in Taurus, Venus is in its own sign.
Yes.
So Venus already has strength.
Right.
And then it's with its friend Rahu. This might be one of the best transits of all of the planets on Rahu, of Rahu.
Interesting.
It indicates success romantically. It indicates success materially.
Nice.
And with the Rahu Venus conjunction in Taurus, it shows a lot of accumulation of material wealth
Right.
and family wealth. So it's like the kind of wealth that's not just for you and your partner, enough wealth for the whole family. It could show the highest potential of wealth in that person's life.
Right.
So the transit of Venus with Rahu, I think, will be most auspicious.
Nice. Good news for Venus Taurus people.
Yeah. As for Libra, um, you know, it's not quite the same at all because Rahu won't be there.
Right.
So, but when Ketu is with Venus, that's at the best a neutral relationship.
Okay.
Now, Venus wants us to have the proper relationship to the material world.
Right.
That's why it asserts beauty and value to various things like money and jewelry and romance and love. It asserts a certain value of the life towards it. Ketu wants you to renunciate against those things.
Right.
So it's more of a conflicting transit with the Ketu and Venus.
Right.
It could mean that it's financially beneficial for the individual.
Okay.
But that money isn't really going to stay. It's more of a come and go kind of financial success. Or maybe it comes and the person has to put it into something that they are developing for their greater goals.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I know someone who has a Scorpio Venus and they have friend of mine, Ketu, of course, transiting over their Venus. And yes, they were earning and they're investing in something else for their future.
Yeah, it might be time to take their goals to the next level.
Right, right.
So K2 Venus is difficult though, just as far as our consciousness is concerned,
Right.
because it's what you call a catch-22. Because Venus is the moksha karka, non-attachment.
Right.
So on one side, you have Venus, which is saying, it's okay to have a balanced and moderate relationship with the material world. The other thing is Ketu, which wants you to have no relationship with it. So the person has to find the balance there. And that kind of means the things in your life that you enjoy with Ketu Venus conjunction, the things that give you pleasure, the things that your romantic pleasures, your financial pleasures, your entertainment pleasures, they might change.
Right.
And you might have to let some of them go.
Hmm.
You
So
know,
do you,
for example, if a person is investing money that they've earned into their business or a new business venture, they have to be willing to sacrifice that money for that business venture.
right. But what do you think about when someone's Ketu is transiting over the Venus, about relationships? Is there a bit detachment in the, I mean, with your partner, your girlfriend, your wife?
Yes, yes, all there is. I've seen examples where if the other partner isn't have enough independent
Right,
to their life, it can be very troubling on the partnership
right,
because that's going to be pushing the native inward,
right,
internal, to work on themselves.
right,
Um, Going to say that, I still love you, I still love you as my husband, or I still love you as my wife or my partner. Um, but I'm really, really working on my preparation for moksha,
right,
which means I don't want to depend on you.
right,
I don't want to feel that I need you. I don't
right,
want to be attached to you.
right.
So that's a little of the Venus transit there. If there's other benefics which are worth
See?
considering. What's
Mer-
that?
Mercury?
Mercury is a great planet to talk about. As we get into Mercury here, um, Mercury and Rahu are considered pretty friendly towards each other, and that's because they're both really smart
Right,
and they both have good senses of humor,
right.
and they're both a little bit sketchy
Hmm.
in terms of, we all know that Mercury was born out of Tara and Soma, the
Right,
wife of Brihaspati.
right,
So, I mean, that story tells enough in itself. And so when you have this Mercury Rahu conjunction, you usually have someone who's very, very intelligent,
right,
especially if it's in good dignity. And Rahu brings charisma. And so if Mercury is well positioned, that person's charisma has the power with Mercury and the message that they're expressing to influence the minds of those around them.
right,
This is where you can find spiritual leaders, political leaders, cult leaders, preachers,
right.
members of the church, members, you can find Brahmins with this conjunction.
Right.
Um, and so that's the positive side of it, is this incredible intelligence and attraction towards, mysticism, occult, spirituality, and religion.
Right.
But I have seen it go the other way, where when Mercury transits Rahu, the person loses their faith in God.
Oh,
The person loses their trust in God because maybe Mercury is super strong.
right,
And so the logic is so strong that it's hard for them to experience the mysticism, let's say when they're chanting. They can't go to a kirtan concert and experience the bhava.
Right. Right.
You know, I feel bad for them. But it is something where there is this energy with the Mercury where if it's not in a balanced place when Rahu transits the Mercury, the person could really favor the logical scientific
Right.
and say that everything that's spiritual or religious is nonsense, and much more go towards the atheistic direction.
Right.
So I've seen signs where that person with Rahu and Mercury, they're a preacher. And I've seen signs with Rahu, Mercury, where they are staunch atheist.
Oh.
And it all has to do with this position of, can I understand and experience God and the divinity in a mystical, analogical way? For example, I experience the divine light mystically when I'm chanting.
Right.
But I experiencing it logically when I'm doing Jyotish.
Yes.
So it's all about that person finding a way also to experience spirituality through some kind of science or logical method. And even in this Western world that we're living in, we're developing something called spiritual science.
Yes.
They are now finding studies that there are chemicals that are released in your brain when you are born and when you die that causes you to have these massive hallucinogenic experiences.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, the research is incredible.
Hmm.
All the chemicals, the near-death experience is a chemical reaction going on in your brain.
Right.
So moksha has its chemical reaction as well, which means moksha has a chemical, which is why they call sometimes this chemical the God particle.
Right.
So there is this spiritual science too, which is like, you can be a scientist, but believe in God and the spirit and the afterlife as well. It's not mutually exclusive.
Right.
Science and spirituality do not have to be in war. They can be conjoined together. And that's what I think is the real power and beauty of the Rahu Mercury.
Right. That's beautifully said. Yeah.
Now, Ketu Mercury are enemies.
Hmm.
Pretty strong enemies.
Okay.
And in lots of cases of autism and the Asperger disease,
Mhm.
or what they call being on the spectrum now, which has become a very popular term,
Right.
is shown very commonly in this Ketu Mercury conjunction.
Hmm.
That means they may be brilliant in one area of life or brilliant in a few areas of life and be more incompetent in other areas.
Right.
The balance of their gifts, especially their intellectual gifts, are not well balanced.
Hmm.
Ketu creates that erratic nature. So you're looking at someone who's a potential genius,
Right.
someone who can talk to trees and animals,
Right.
something that's hard for us to even believe in. But they might not be able to communicate well human to human.
Right.
They might not be able to communicate well through speaking. Maybe it's writing or actions.
Right.
But if the transit of K2 is hitting your Mercury, the logical part of your consciousness is going to be getting pulled away.
Right.
Now, it depends how logically minded you are, how painful that process is.
Right.
We can either let our logical orientation go and open ourselves to the mystical spiritual possibilities, or we can hold on to only the fact that that if things are logical, rational, and science prove it, those are the only things that are true. But I can tell you that if Mercury is aspecting your Ketu and you're sticking to only believing in the logical, it's going to be a very difficult transit.
Right.
You must open yourself up to the other possibilities. Like maybe the fact that this person, they're labeling autistic, they're labeling Asperger's, they're labeling on the spectrum, is actually a brilliant genius with incredible capacity and potential. And we just have to find that key to unlock that potential.
Right.
So we did Rahu Mercury, Ketu Mercury. Does that cover all of the benefics? Are there any benefics left?
Yeah, I think we're covered with all the benefics. Now we have Saturn and Mars left.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I'd save the malefics for last because obviously those can be the most challenging for people. And, you know, these are the things that can be harder to talk about.
Right.
And I'm not afraid to talk about them because it's about being real with our community and real with our clients.
Right.
But I don't know. Good news first, I think. Now,
Yes.
as we get into the malefics, the first we talk Mars. Now, Rahu and Mars are enemies. Unless you talk to a Rahu Mars person, they'll try to convince you that Rahu and Mars are friends.
Right.
And it looks like sometimes, based on how their life kind of turns out, that they made Rahu and Mars friends.
Right.
But intrinsically, Rahu and Mars are enemies. Because Rahu represents this mystical and occult potential, and Mars represents this more militant, skanda, general energy.
Right.
Rahu wants to travel and see the world and experience culture, and Mars wants to conquer and slaughter.
Right.
And so there's this energy when Rahu and Mars get together, people can have poor impulse control.
Right.
People can be violent. People can be aggressive.
Mm.
As far as their belief systems, they can be radical. They can be very firm or stiff-necked or stubborn type people.
Right. Right. Right.
Don't want to change their mind, unbending. And so if Mars is transiting your Rahu, just know that's going to be challenging your Rahu even more. Don't let that aggressive energy get to you. Don't let that stubborn, frustrated energy get to you.
Right.
But again, it is a difficult transit. And one of the things about Rahu and Mars is Rahu kind of makes the future very uncertain. And Mars has to do with accidents, adventures. So the Rahu-Mars conjunction on its positive side can bring great adventures into a person's life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And during this transit, they may go to places in the world that they have never gone to.
Right.
They may experience the world and experience different cultures. And there is a positive side to that.
Right.
But the dark side of the Rahu-Mars conjunction is that these people can be so strongly attached to what they believe that if you don't believe what they believe, you're their enemy.
Mm. So very rigid in their
Very
mind.
rigid, very stubborn, very stiff-necked. And so the remedy for that is to get a back massage. But no, I'm just joking. The real remedy for that is to understand you must pacify Pitta.
Right.
you must keep these pitta aspects calm and pacified, especially from the mental standpoint. I apologize, it's my neighbor.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's very important that you also develop breathing practices that are going to keep pitta under control. You know, like shitali, sheet curry, and
Right.
working on these various pranayama to keep pitta under control. And Rahu, we also want to keep under control. This conjunction of Rahu Mars, Mars also represents the blood. It
Yeah.
represents the liver. It represents the skin. So a Rahu Mars conjunction can be very difficult on the human body.
Right. So maybe eating a lot of pitta pacifying food, leaving the spices out, lots of cooling drinks.
Otherwise, they will have to deal with much inflammation.
Right.
But it's not just the body, it's also the mind, but we know how deeply interconnected they are.
Yes. Yeah.
What's more concerning is Ketu Mars.
Right.
And you think it's less concerning. Why? Because Ketu and Mars are friends. Mars is in Scorpio, Ketu's exalted. But you have these malefic energies really, really powerful working together.
Right.
Last time this happened, September 11th,
Wow.
when the towers were destroyed.
Right.
And then there was war in Afghanistan, and there is war in Iraq.
Right.
So that's what makes me nervous about some of this transit in general. And I know we've discussed this the earlier part of the videos, and I hope I'm wrong.
Right.
So yes, it's very important for us to look at this transit of Rahu and Mars and consider the fact to not let that aggressive pitta tendency get involved into our lives. Understand that transit and how it's going to affect us. Now, the K2
Right.
transit on Mars and is going to be very significant. Mars will be in its own sign. K2 will be exalted. And what happens to the native is they're already very passionate and enthusiastic because they're Mars Scorpio person.
Right.
And they feel things very deeply. And then you add K2 in its exalted form to that. And it can add a little bit of craziness.
Right.
These people, sometimes their belief systems and belief structures are very extreme. And if K2 was just exalted without Mars, they can have an extreme belief structure, but they wouldn't act on it.
Right.
Like for the example, they might believe that they have to do violence in the name of their God.
Right.
But Mars isn't there. So they would still think that, but they would never do it.
Right.
Throw Mars in there, you create some trouble. Where the person doesn't just feel that way, but now they're persuaded to do it.
Right.
In a lot of case studies where I look at terrorism, you see K2 Mars.
Right. It's
And
quite violent.
in a lot of examples of murder,
Mm-hmm.
you see the K2 Mars. In a lot of example of natural disaster, Umayha, Mars, son of Earth, you also see the K2 Mars coming into this direct conjunction with each other. So this is significant transit for someone who has Mars and Scorpio in their chart. They have an opportunity here to transform most spiritually to reach their highest spiritual potential. They can, instead of going towards violence and aggression and power, which the Mars will push them towards, are going towards their dinacharya, are going towards their sadhana, and is going towards their spiritual practices. But if they are radical in their beliefs, you can expect this transit to make them more vulnerable in their actions.
Right.
Again, another reason to be more concerned for whoever has this transit, how that might play out for their part in society, because they're the ones who are going to act out the radical beliefs. You know, you have the left, you have the right, you have the middle, and then you have the extreme radical on both sides,
Right.
which no one can argue is correct. That uses violence and murder to solve their problems. It's just something to be careful about. I mean, if a person already has Mars in Scorpio, they probably already have to work on some anger management stuff.
Right.
So hopefully they have already been working on it. But if they haven't been working on it, and then K2 comes on it, they got to start working on it, or they're going to lash out on their partners. They're going to lash out at their family. They're going to lash out at their friends.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with the people that they're lashing out against. When they really need to either put it into their spiritual practices, or it's also considered remedial to practice the martial arts during a transit like this.
Right. Or go for exercising. Exercising will help too, right?
Yeah, but they're young man and they like to fight. Organized fighting is considered healthy. Wrestling.
Right.
So the last planet which I'd like to cover, and we always save the best for last, is
Yes.
Kṣaṇāti. And when Rahu transits Shani, it's very considered somewhat auspicious. First of all, Shani is Rahu's best friend. I'm not sure it goes back the other way, but it's definitely Rahu's favorite.
Right.
And that's why it's said to co-rule Aquarius by some.
Yes.
And so there is this position of the Rahu transiting the Saturn. And at first you think that this could be a difficult transit, but both these planets want the same thing.
Right.
They just have very, very different ways of going about how to get you there. So it's very helpful to understand if you have a Rahu Saturn transit coming,
Mm-hmm.
the Saturn will be pushing you to get where you need to go by helping you practice patience,
Right.
by making you practice humility and honesty and virtues and responsibilities and being of service.
Right.
But ultimately, what Saturn wants you to do with this conjunction is to surrender to the will of the God.
Right.
Because we have Saturn is called Mahakala, Lord of Time. But we have our understanding of time. That is not necessarily anywhere related to the Deva's understanding of time. As it is discussed, like 1 second of the Brahman is like many millions of years for us or more.
Right. Yeah.
So there is this energy here of Saturn and Rahu. Rahu also wants you to surrender to the will of God. But how is it going to make you do this? It's going to make it impossible for you to try to find the will on your own.
Right.
It's going to make the future impossible to predict. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to make The things that you want to happen quickly, especially with the conjunction of Saturn, happen much slower, if they happen at all. But Rahu gets what it wants, so it will happen, but it will happen much later than you would like it to happen, and it will not look how you thought it would look by the conjunction of Rahu and Saturn. So it's just very important to understand that this Rahu and Saturn conjunction is considered positive in terms of the individual getting what they're yearning for or what they are striving for, but they must completely surrender when they think they are going to get it and how they think it's supposed to look. Like, I'm supposed to be a millionaire by the year 2025. No, maybe you have a couple $100,000 in 2025 and you're not a millionaire till 2035.
Right, right.
Is it really worth stressing every day over? Letting your mind go crazy? No, this can be a helpful conjunction of where it's just a time to relax and enjoy life and see what life brings you.
Right.
Now, the Ketu Saturn conjunction is all too familiar because we've been experiencing it for quite some time, finally getting a little break from it. We know what it's like now. We know that it's about a shift in our lives, letting go of our attachments, letting go of what we want, of what we necessarily want to do with what our dharma is and what our responsibilities are. It's not like Saturn and Ketu are enemies. You can consider them friends if you want to. But Saturn represents our mundane responsibilities here on Earth. Ketu represents our desire to ascend to the moksha bhava.
Right.
So what's that conjunction really going to do? It's going to say, okay, what responsibilities do I have here that I must satisfy so that I can prepare for the moksha, so that I can prepare for the samadhi, so that I can prepare for the enlightenment? What responsibilities or duties do I still have left to my family, friends, job, career, etc., that I must finish so I can truly focus on this spiritual concept? And it can be either an easy period or a hard period for the person because they're going to have responsibilities here in the material world, but a desire to explore the spiritual. And that can be balanced in a really nice way. But if they abandon the spiritual and only focus on their mundane material responsibilities, they will be unhappy. And if they only focus on their spiritual calling, they'll be broke.
Right.
So it's really about finding that balance of energies between the material and the spiritual.
Right.
So I think that covers all of the planets. And this has been a very exciting series of discussing Rahu and Ketu's exalted transit and how it will affect everyone's chart, no matter if you have, no matter any planets placed in the signs that Rahu or Ketu are placed in, Taurus and Scorpio. And I hope all of you have been able to assert some information and knowledge from this and apply it to your own charts. I hope that all of you are trying to apply this information to your own charts. And I'd always like to give a special, special thanks to Navjeet for her knowledge and her wisdom and her commentary, as well to and her clarification that she brings to our viewers. So just thank you so much, Navjeet. It is a pleasure to share this series with you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming and sharing your lovely knowledge and giving us different perspective. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I know everybody loves it. They leave comments below. So we are loving, and we'll come up with new series. Let us know what you guys would like us to make. You guys can make a comment below, and we would like to bring that subject and love to discuss that. Right, Kṣaṇāti?
100%. I think it's been magical since it started. We wanted to do one video. Now we're on part 6, part 7. And it
Right.
continues. Now we're going to start a wonderful series. Who knows how many parts that will go?
Exactly. Yes.
So yes, this is the start of something which will start to gain a lot of momentum and a lot of strength as we start to tap into certain areas of Jyotish and aspects that people don't really tapped into. We've tapped into past lifetimes.
Yes.
Now we're tapping into how the Rahu Ketu transit will affect everyone in every way.
Right.
So continually, we will find these areas where people haven't done the research, and we will show them that research has been done, and we will all learn together.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, please leave us comment below how you guys like the video as well as what you guys like us to bring more on and like to discuss. And we would love to do that for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Namaste. Blessings, everyone. Hari Om. Om Namah Shivaya.